Welcome to the forest. My name is Elkins, and this is a time and place for holy stuff. In today's lesson of objects, we are going to explore one that is significant to this place, the University of the Forest, in the forest, because Drew is located, in fact, in a space that was identified as early as the 1700s as the forest. And in this campus remain to this day examples, living specimens that could be called even primeval trees. But today I'd like us to consider the acorn. It is a symbol that in this space and in this time is probably only considered of great value to squirrels. And in fact, the students who collected these had to scramble with the squirrels to make sure that they got them before the squirrels did. But the room that we are in now, called Craig Chapel, has embedded in one of the highest places in this structure one of these. In fact, hanging higher, placed higher than a cross in this space is what the designers wanted to express to future generations, and that is, in fact, an acorn. So one might ask, why an acorn? What was happening in the late 1800s that when they built a holy human space, they would have, in fact, carved it right at the top of that apex? Well, I want to read a quote that would have resonated deeply with the builders and the inhabitants of this holy space, this chapel. And it's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says this simply: "The creation of 1,000 forests is in one acorn." So perhaps that is the reason those who built this space placed high above us an acorn, because it promises a future, and it only takes 1,000, 10,000 forests in this one. Or perhaps this biblical notion that, in fact, unless it falls into the ground and dies and is reborn into a seedling, there is no future except for the squirrels. We don't know why they put it there. Those are some reasons to reflect. But these days, particularly because seminary education can be a long, hard walk, when students come to my class halfway through their time here, I first ask them to collect. And then toward the middle of the class, when energies are lagging and people feel as if it's an impossible journey to complete, I give them one of these back and tell them to hold on to it through the next several winters until they in fact have that opportunity to walk across this back porch of Mead Hall and receive the sign that they are now finished. And then they're to go and plant this one acorn, because in this one acorn there are 10,000 forests. A story and a portion of a poem to read to you about squirrels and about acorns. This poem that I will read a section of was written by Sean Nevin in honor of our new president, Marianne Beanger. And I just want to read it to bring you into this chapel and the forest. It's entitled The Forest Today. In the forest, knowledge is reborn out of itself. A stand of white oak like a portico, its great pillars rooted beneath a canopy of stars. Acorns gleam, then drop in burlap caps to earth. They feed the mad accountancy of squirrels. And then that brings me to the story about squirrels and the lack of acorns and this space. It's a story that was told to me by one of our beloved professors, now retired, Dave Graybeal. And he told me this story as we walked in this chapel where he had taught almost 60 years. And he explained that once upon a time in this chapel, it would be closed during the summer. The doors would be locked. And when the faculty and classes would come back, those doors would be open for the first worship service. Well, when that happened, when he was a young professor, the doors were open and this dreadful, dreadful stench came pouring out of the chapel. And when they came inside, gingerly, holding their noses, trying to discover what in the world had happened, what they discovered, approximately here, stretched out in front of the altar, was a dead squirrel. Dave Graybill said, well, it was obvious that it had been here and gotten locked in, and that was that. And it was disposed of. It was an irritation, an offense, and an inevitability. One dead squirrel. They're everywhere at Drew. Who would miss one dead squirrel? The posture, however, in front of the altar struck some as potentially Christological. Something about God, perhaps. But it wasn't until they began to inspect the windows and the windowsills that message became very, very clear. Because the squirrel, trapped in this space all summer, had gone from window to window, seeing freedom, seeing the air, seeing where life was through these beautiful windows that have never had stained glass. The squirrel had gnawed at each window, attempting to get free. And Dave said when he went from window to window and realized that those markings could be considered not simply an irritating damage to physical property, but in fact evidence of the way of the cross, the way in which the wildness and innocence of creation was trapped in what was supposed to be holy space. That the significance of that offering and the importance of that narrative and the understanding that we are in the presence of a God who creates as well as redeems. It wasn't until all those pieces came together that he could speak about the way of the cross, taught to the community by one sacrificial squirrel. When I came, you could still see the marks. They've been removed, they've been improved. But it's very important not to forget the story, particularly for those of you who might watch this and ever lived in a forest, or perhaps those of you who need to be reminded that it is in the innocence of wild things lies our salvation. And that is as Christ would have it be. We are in a series of stories, squirrels and acorns and the wholly human and sometimes irritating relationships between those three objects: relations, people, and creatures. So I wanted to focus on this particular image of squirrel. Now, some of you have ever experienced a squirrel that gets in your attic and they choose to chew out rafters. Know that these are not necessarily romantic creatures, or even creatures that speak to us of holy things. They speak to us of forces of nature that are very, very difficult to control. But I want to draw your attention to this particular squirrel. And it is painted on a gourd. And it is obviously having the leftovers of what some undergraduate perhaps left behind for trash, or perhaps it retrieved it from the trash bin to finish its lunch. This is very much a part of our life here, but it is also a reminder that there's a way in which this image, which was painted on a gourd, represents the way in which a local community can push back against the forces of globalization, if you will. And the image of the squirrel, that small, persistent gnawing that undermines even great structures, I think is a good way to say that. In the area of Kentucky, where often I take a class on cross-cultural experiences in Appalachia for education and art and energy, there is a gathering of artists that are looking for ways to return to the area handmade objects that in fact can help support a community. And this is a newly emerging art form in the Appalachian area. You grow the gourds, you dry the gourds, you paint the gourds, and sometimes you take orders as to what goes on this. And so in my several visits, when I saw the work of the artists, I asked if they could do a squirrel, a Duluth squirrel, and they came up with what I think is a masterpiece. But the reason this art form has emerged is because some of the traditional forms of art, such as handmade quilts, have been almost completely erased as a means of income because of the way in which globalization works. It is cheaper now to buy a quilt that is made in China, that is using the traditional Appalachian patterns, than it is to pay a woman or a group of women who once could make a supplement to their family's income by that beautiful handwork. So you can't make a living, or even in fact enhance your living, with quilt making, a traditional Appalachian art form. So this is emergent, and it's not only in an Appalachian community. There are other communities that have realized this organic form of art. You grow it, you dry it, you decorate it, and you give back to the community. That which is unique belongs to one of a kind. Now, I asked for this one, this squirrel with a Reese cup, as a way of reminding myself of our situation here in the forest, where we have lots of these squirrels, but of one of the most important lessons I ever received about ethics, Christian ethics. And it was given to me in a classroom long ago at Duke by an incredible teacher of church history, Dave Henry, who at one point stopped his lecture on the history of the frontier churches and said, "Do you know there is one question you can ask, and on the basis of the answer you receive, you can evaluate the ethics of any institution." But of course, we paused. What was the one question that would in fact integrate all forms of knowledge about the complexity of ethics, Christian ethics in particular. And he said, here's the question. The question is, who's supposed to take out my trash? I can remember we wrote it down and looked at each other and tried to decide whether we were supposed to laugh. What was that? The question that you could use to evaluate the ethics of any institution, religious, secular, who's supposed to take out my trash? Well, it's no leap of faith to arrive at the conclusion where we are today, that in fact that is the question, not only of ethics, but perhaps of Christianity itself. Who's supposed to take out our trash? And the way we answer that, leaves us open for the judgment of not only the world, but the Creator. So this object, gourd, squirrel, trash, holds all those things together and reminds me, every time I look at it, that the answer needs to hold up in the light of the one who made this world. Who's supposed to take out